Good evening and welcome to the Italian Wine Tasting Masterclass. I am Brunello Di and as a member of the Ottawa Italian Week Festival Board, I'm happy to introduce our Master Sommelier for tonight, Véronique Rivest. She's a renowned and acclaimed sommelier. She was the best sommelier of the Americas in 2012, and she won twice Canada's Best Sommelier competition in 2006 and 2012. At the World Best Sommelier competition, Véronique placed second in 2015. Now, she is the owner of Soave in Gatineau. In 2015, after only only 1 year of being open, it was named one of the top 10 best new restaurants in Canada by Untitled magazine. Tonight, we will be delighted to follow Véronique in tasting different wines from different Italian regions. Before letting you start, I would like to tell you some words on wine and on wine culture in Italy. As you know, wine is one of the most ancient drinks in the world. It had its special setting in the Mediterranean area because of the perfect climate for the grapes and the heat for the fermenting process. Greeks and Romans had celebrated it as a divine drink, and not without a reason, I would say. And so they had their own deities as gods of wine, Dionysius and Bacchus. Homerus in the Odyssey called the Greek sea the wine-colored sea, il mare colore del vino. Many centuries of literature, poetry, and art had celebrated the wine and its joy. Every single detail is important to determine the final result, from the cork to the barrels, from the barrique to the cellars. I have the fortune to have a winemaker in my family, and I have seen how much dedication to the wine making is connected to the love for his homeland, the Basilicata region. The variety of Italian wines reflects each territory, each valley and hill along the peninsula, from the north to south, and complements the individual recipes in all of those places. So, let's enjoy the Italian wines, and do not forget Il Vino Veritas.
Thank you so much and welcome everybody, and thank you for your patience. I've put everybody organizing this through a bit of a hectic time before because I felt very strongly about serving the wines at the right temperature. Didn't want to pour them all out an hour before you arrived, in which case it would have been too warm. But yes, so thank you for bearing with me. And I tend to talk a lot, you'll find out very quickly, and we have an hour and a half to go through all of Italy, which is basically impossible, but we will try our best. If I talk too fast, let me know. But if you have any questions at any moment, please don't hesitate. I'll try and manage the time. If there are too many questions, I'll put it off until the end. But please feel free. Don't feel intimidated at all. It's always been my biggest battle with wine has been to make it more approachable, more... if I gave any of you a plate of food, something to eat, most of you would say if you like it or if you don't. Most of you would even be able to say why you like it or you don't like it. We give you a glass of wine and ask the same thing, and then everybody freezes. It's like, oh no, I don't know. I don't have the vocabulary. I'm not an expert. I don't know. If you're able to give your opinion about food, you're able to give your opinion about wine. Of course, it's an extremely vast, extremely complex and complicated subject. And it just gets more and more complicated. There's wine being made all over the world today. China is the 5th largest wine-producing country, right? They weren't even in the picture 20 years ago. So we're always learning. I'm learning something new every week. I'm unlearning things I've learned 30 years ago, because with science and new technologies, we discover that things we thought are not what we thought they were. Anyhow, so I ask questions all the time, and it's only by asking questions that we will learn, right? And better understand. So if anybody has an arrogant attitude towards you about wine, leave them. Don't take any advice from them. Don't drink with them. There's enough generous people, and the more you know in the world of wine, usually the more humble you are. The very, very arrogant people are usually the ones that know the least. So, don't hang around with them. So, any questions at any time, right? And I'll manage if we can do that or not. Does everybody have 6 glasses in front of them? 2 whites and 4 reds. If you don't, now's the time to say so. Okay. We are going to be tasting from left to right. So we're starting with the whites. Okay. So I'll be talking about wine number 1 through wine number 6. So if you move your glasses around, you deal with it. They're in the right order right now, from 1 to 6, from left to right. Okay. Although some of them you will see are quite distinctive, just aromatically. Okay? So Italy has a huge history, of course, in the world of wine, right? We know today that the first vines that were planted by humans to make wine, because vines grow naturally, right, wild, and we have lots of wild vines in North America. They just don't necessarily make the best wines. All the grapes that we know, Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, but Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, they're all from the same European vine variety that was disseminated throughout the world. So the first cultivation of the vine was in the Caucasus Mountains, so in Georgia, in Turkey, around that area. And from there, it spread through Phoenicia, through Egypt, through all of the Mediterranean. The Romans, of course, Greece was hugely important in developing the culture of the vine, and the Romans in dispersing it throughout the rest of the world, right? The rest of the Mediterranean world, and much further, to Germany, to the more northerly parts of Europe. And we're talking, quite a few centuries before Jesus Christ. The cultivation of the vine in Georgia, that's about 6,000 before Christ. Right? And it was another few thousand years before it started being disseminated around. So very, very old history, but what's very specific about Italy to me almost rhymes with, for some people it rhymes with food, for others it rhymes with wine, rhymes with both, right? And in Italy, they definitely go hand in hand. Italian wines are food wines. When we talk, there's been a lot of changes in the world of wine, much more modern winemaking, wine being made to have, to replace a cocktail, to have as an aperitif, to have as a drink and whatever. But the real Italian wine culture is about having wine at the table. And a lot of the wines are made that way. So often it happens to me, I pour a glass of Italian wine to somebody and they're like, I'm not sure. I'm like, wait a second, I bring some food. Right? They come into they make sense at the table with food. Italy's one of the largest it is the largest producing wine country along with France. They battle for first place year in, year out. It's always one or the other. Third is Spain, quite far behind. And then, anybody has a clue who fourth is? California, right? So the USA, but 95% of American wine is California. And what's also specific about Italy compared to France, there's places in France where there's no vines. There's nowhere in Italy where you can actually grow vines where there's no vines. The only reason there's no vines is because it's too mountainous, or it's too cold, or it's too hot. But everywhere, throughout the whole peninsula, there's vines in every single 20 regions. Whereas in France, there's a few pockets where there are no vineyards. Right? In Italy, it's everywhere. What we don't always necessarily think about, though, is about how hilly Italy really is, right? So that card is really just to show you everything that's in rayures, in lines, is mountains over 500 meters of altitude. Okay? So there's, of course, the Apennines going through the whole peninsula, the Alps in the north, but most of Italy is extremely hilly. There's not a lot of very big agricultural plains. The one in the north, that biggest stretch of green you see up there, the green is all the plains. That's the Po Valley, right? One of the biggest agricultural plains in all of Italy. But otherwise, lots of mountains, so that means there's not that many, sea of vineyards, where there's vineyards for tens and thousands of, there's places where there's like 1,000 hectares of vineyards, like huge, really a sea of vineyard. Italy, there's a lot of little pockets here and there, and that's what makes it so unique, what makes for such a great variety. Because wine, right, we often throw around a word called terroir. That wines taste what they taste because they come of a place, right? That's the sense of terroir. Terroir comes from the French word terre, for earth, for soil, but it's not just based on soil. It's based on the inclination of the hill. Is it flat? Is it super steep? Is it, is it facing north? Is it facing south? Is it southeast? Is there a forest close by? What are the winds like? All of that, everything that makes that microclimate has an influence on the vine. You were saying, from the barrels to, there's so much variables. So every time you go 2 kilometers down the road, sometimes it's even only a couple of feet, 10, 20 feet, and the soil changes. There's a slope slightly changes, or the composition of the soil, right? And that means your wine will taste different. That's if the wines are made as naturally as possible. I like wines that speak of a place. There's an American magazine that translated terroir into English, called it somewhereness. And I love that word, right? It tastes of a place. But to have that taste of a place, you need vines that are farmed as naturally as possible. If everything is super intensively chemically farmed with lots of pesticide, of chemical fertilizers, you're kind of killing the nuances of that place, right? You're making wines. You can make there's as much difference between a very natural made wine and a very technological, highly processed wine, as there is between highly processed food. And right, we have, it will be the difference as between a raw milk artisanal cheese and craft single slices, okay? There are craft single slices in the world of wine. People don't always realize that because you don't have ingredient lists, right, on wine bottles. Some producers would probably not have enough room on the surface of the bottle to list all of the ingredients. There's about, depending on the country, 200 or so additives that are permitted. They're all legal, right? It's just like for food. But we have to stop thinking that wine is just purely crushed grape juice, fermented grape juice. That's what it should be, at least as close to that as possible. So there you have the 20 regions of Italy, and those are all different grape varieties. Sorry, it's probably impossible to read, but just to give you an idea of the uniqueness. You know it just for food, right? Every region has their specialty. They all have their own indigenous grape varieties. That's what's really, really cool about places like Italy that have a huge heritage of indigenous grapes. We don't know. There's at least 500. Some people talk about 1,000. Some people talk about even more. Right? It's hard to say. One of the most common white grapes in Italy is called Trebbiano. And there's probably Trebbiano in every single region of Italy, but now that we've started using DNA to analyze the grapes, we're realizing that each Trebbiano is different. They're actually not the same grape. Okay? So there's really hundreds of different grape varieties. And seriously, that's the beauty. There's that taste of a place, but it's combined to those local grapes, which make up for something that has a strong identity. Right? I was really afraid in the 90s. At one point, we were thinking the whole world would be made of Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay, because everybody was ripping out their indigenous grape varieties. Because who wants to buy Passerina? They don't know what that is, right? It's not a selling point, whereas Cabernet Sauvignon is really a big seller. So people would rip out their indigenous varieties and put in these international grapes, and it was such a trend at one point, it was almost scary. Now it's all the opposite. Everybody is relishing, revitalizing their indigenous grapes. Some were on the brink of extinction. Some have disappeared. And a lot have been found, like barely. There was a few vines left here and there. Winemakers were interested by them. They looked at them. They grew them a bit. They saw they were quality grapes. So they started replanting them, right? So we're seeing more and more of that. So in every region, you will find completely different grapes. I didn't mention just about the quantities. There's just so you have an idea. And the pours are a little bit generous, but it's more or less the equivalent of somewhere between 2 and a bit less than 3 glasses that you will have tonight. Just saying so you're aware of what you're consuming. Right? It's over an hour and a half with some foods, but be aware. Okay. You're responsible for what you're drinking. I have a very elegant spit bucket. I'm using my spit bucket. Okay, so we're going to dive right into it. Of course, we will not have a wine from each of the 20 regions. Right? And again, in each region, there's such a huge variety, we will just look at one thing. Some of the things we're doing tonight are super classic. Some are a bit more out there because, once again, right, everybody knows Sangiovese, everybody knows Chianti. We're still going to have a Chianti tonight, but we're going to have other grapes that you've maybe never heard of before. Right? Just to show a little bit the extent of the richness of those indigenous grape varieties in Italy. So we're starting off with the region of Marche. So that's, it looks like a real puzzle, but well, that's Italy. The puzzle. There's so many things going on. And in every region, they make so many different styles. You know, like Burgundy is relatively simple. They do Pinot Noir and they do Chardonnay. That's it. And it's called Burgundy. But they have thousands of different little plots with different names. And Italy has all those different plots, but on top of that, it has a whole bunch of different grapes and then a whole bunch of different appellations in which they don't, because white Burgundy is whiter as red, and it's still wine. It's still dry wine. They make it a little bit of spark. Italy, in every region, they make red, white, rosé, pale red, dark red, sparkling white, sparkling red, dry sparkling white, sweet sparkling white, right? The amount of different styles is huge. So it's really fascinating. It's a bit confusing when you're trying to understand it and study it, but you're never short of fun wines to try. Okay? So this is central Italy. To the top, you see the region of Chianti. Okay, that first kind of rectangle there on the top, that's a region of Chianti. But we're looking at the East Coast. I always mix up my East and West, I'm sorry. On the East Coast, you have Emilia-Romagna coming down the top, and then we fall into Marche, and then further to the south, Abruzzi, right? So this is in Marche, and Marche does a lot of really good, well, I should say white wines, also great red wines, and dry and sweet. But it's funny, a lot of people think of Italy and think automatically of red, right? There's a lot of people that even say, Italy doesn't really make great whites. Are you kidding me? First, there's a lot of sparklings, right? We're not doing sparkling tonight, but great Prosecco is one of the world's biggest selling wines. Huge Italian success. But again, there's a lot in a lot of different regions. Prosecco is a very particular style. Franciacorta is a little bit more in the style of Champagne. But there's sparkling wines everywhere. We're not doing sparkling. But there's a lot of amazing still dry white wines in Italy. Not a lot of very fruity wines, if you make the exception of Moscato. Moscato is a very widely planted grape in Italy, again, throughout the peninsula, from Piemonte to Sicily, and made in a lot of different styles, most often in sweeter styles. Right? But other than that, the dry white table wines in Italy, think of the ones we know, Soave, right? Orvieto. They're usually light, crisp, unoaked, not super fruity wines. They're more savory. Savory is a word, I'm telling you right now, that I will use a lot throughout the evening. To me, it's a word that I cannot translate into French, and I use it a lot specifically about Italian wines. Remember what I said at the beginning about Italian wines being such food wines? Super fruity wines, tutti fruity wines, it might be fun to drink by the pool or on a hot summer day, but they're not the best wines to go with food, right? I said Italian wines are made for food. The whites are a great example of that. So the first white in your glass is one of the better known whites of Marche. Marche is known for Rosso Conero or Rosso Piceno in red wines. That's a red wine that's made from the Montepulciano grape. They also grow Sangiovese, but it's mostly Montepulciano. And the white it's mostly known for is Verdicchio. Right? Verdicchio is the name of the grape variety, and there's 2 appellations in Marche known for that grape. Verdicchio di Castelli di Jesi, which is what we have, and I'm sorry for my Italian. If I make really bad pronunciations, let me know. But so that's the wine you have in your first glass on the left, and then there's also a much smaller appellation called Verdicchio Di Materica. Okay? Those are 2 well-known appellations in the Marche region, and they are whites that again are not fruity. You can do whatever you want. You can smell, taste. I'll take you through them, but don't be afraid to smell at them, taste them. There's also food. Okay, I should start with that. There's also food in front of you, but you're super disciplined. I'm like, nobody's touching anything until I tell them to. It's okay. So the food I would suggest to maybe try the first 2 whites. And then you can have, the crackers are always good to kind of neutralize your palate in between wines, but we're going crescendo also, right? So you don't absolutely need to eat them. Maybe I'd hold on to the prosciutto and the salami for when we get to the reds, but you do whatever you want to, right? And even the cheeses, but if you eat anything, just have a little bit of cracker to put your mouth back to 0, and there you go. Everything, and we are multisensorial beings, right? All our senses interact, and there's so much that influences how we smell and taste, okay? If you don't like a wine the first time you try it, please don't write it off immediately. Put the cork back in, put it in the fridge. That's the best way to keep any wine. Forget any fancy gadgets, cork back in the bottle, and in the fridge. The cold helps preserve wine, so the reds also. You just need to take them out a few hours earlier the next day, okay? I did multiple tests with all kind of fancy systems, taking the air out, putting gas in, all kind of preservative. Nothing works like putting the bottle back in the fridge, okay? So if you try wine and you don't like it, put it in the fridge, try it again the next day. If you still don't like it, then you have my blessing to say you'll never buy it again, but you will be surprised how your impression might be different. We don't taste the same way depending on the time of the day, depending what we've eaten before, the music you're listening to, the temperature outside, the people you're with. You can drink the greatest wine in the world. If you're with somebody you hate, it's going to taste pretty bland. Right? Seriously. Okay? And then you have a simple but really nice wine with people you love, and it tastes like heaven. Okay? All right, so first wine. This is a Verdicchio di Castelli di Jesi. Okay? Casal Farneto is the producer. These are all wines that were purchased at the LCBO, so you could eventually find some if we didn't buy them all. I don't think so. GranCasale is simply the name of the cuvée, and Verdicchio di Castelli di Jesi, Classico Superiore. Here we go, with the complicatedness of Italy's laws. Okay? So in most appellations, you have Chianti and Chianti Classico. Hugely different. Right? We'll talk about it when we get there. But Classico usually refers to a zone within an appellation. So it's very often the heart of the appellation. So much smaller, what was historically considered the best part of that appellation, that's the Classico zone in most appellations. Then Superiore usually denotes grapes that are a little bit riper at harvest, where you have a slightly higher alcohol level. Okay? So just slightly higher in quality. Did everybody smell this? Do you all know why we do this? Do it on the table if you're not used to it, and beware of your neighbors. Okay? That's one of the reasons why we don't fill the glasses too much. Okay? Because you want to be able to do that to release more aromatics. Okay? To help. It's the same reason we do that bizarre gargling thing. You know, we put wine in our mouth and then we go. It's because we let air in for the same reason as this, so it becomes more aromatic. Okay, because when the wine is in the mouth, we smell it. We don't taste it. I'll get to that. What does it smell like? White wine? See what I mean by it's not tutti frutti? Like, there's nobody that's going to go, oh, it's super peachy, or it smells like pineapple, or, right? Anything else? Pepper? A little bit of spice. Granny Smith? Somebody say Granny Smith? Green apple? But super faint, right? And maybe a little bit of citrus skin. Okay, let's try it. Same thing on the palate, right? How would you describe this? Is it dry? It's very dry. Even whites. Italians are, when I'm tasting wines blind, especially with reds, if I put a red in my mouth and I go, oh, that's dry, usually Italian wines are, real Italian wines are really dry. Again, because they're meant to go with food. So it's very dry. Is it refreshing? Does it feel like heavy and flat, or does it feel like lively and fresh? Right? That's acidity, right? That's what makes your mouth water. So if you're not sure about the acidity of a wine, you just pay attention to how much your mouth is watering. The more you generate saliva, the higher the acidity in the wine. That's something that brings freshness to wine. It's something that makes them more versatile with food, and it's also something that makes them ageable. Right? A wine with very low acidity, it's very fat and round, will tend to not age as well as something like this. Any other feelings you get on the palate? So it's super dry. It's fresh. I'm my mouth is watering. I have to keep swallowing. It's pithy, right? Like citrus pith, like citrus skins. Again, like the green apple is almost more like the skin than the flesh, right? There's that. And it's almost, this is funny too, it's something we never used to say 20 years ago, and now it's saline. Do you have an impression of salinity? Right? Just something briny. And that's, to me, a lot of Eastern Italy's white wines have that. The vineyards that are by the sea, okay? Verdicchio is a bit more inland, but it's in the hills, super open to the breeze from the ocean, and they have such wonderful seafood in Marche, right? All of the East Coast. There's some of the most wonderful little trattorias where they make absolutely magnificent seafood, and this is the perfect wine for it. Right? So I don't know if I remember years ago I used to work at the LCBO, and the only Verdicchio I knew was Fasi Battaglia. I don't know if you remember that very funny looking amphora-like bottle with the little message, little paper. Anyhow, so it was a very commercial. It's probably the biggest producer of Verdicchio, but still it was a little bit that style. Now we're starting to see single vineyards, right? Producers that will single out certain vineyards where the Verdicchio is specifically good and bottle it under the name of that vineyard, right? So really singular expressions of different sites of Verdicchio. But that's a perfect example of what Verdicchio is like. I'm like talking, sorry. So yeah, you see the Rosso Piceno, the yellow part at the bottom, Rosso Conero, is just above. And then the Verdicchios are a little bit more inland. It's the green and the blue, right? You see the town of Jesi there. So it's not too far from the coast, right? Ancona is the main city there. And the best Verdicchios will definitely always have that kind of saline, briny character, super fresh and dry, and they're just perfect for fresh fish and seafood, right? Just simply grilled or with olive oil and lemon or herbs, right? Something simple and super fresh. There is in Marche something really, and look at all the different appellations. Those are all the third one, Vernaccia di Sera Petrona. That's a sparkling red that's sometimes dry but mostly sweet. Very unique, right? How often do you see sparkling reds? And then dry or sweet. It's right. Italy has that huge variety that you don't find everywhere. There's another one that's interesting because we're tasting another wine that's a little bit like it. The third one from the bottom called Lacrima di Moro. Lacrima di Moro is the grape variety. It's from a little town called Moro d'Alba and around there. And it's, I don't know if any of you know Gewürztraminer. It's a very, very perfumey Alsatian grape. It smells like perfume. It smells like roses, and this is a red wine, and it smells exactly like that. Right? Once again, when I say there are so many unique grape varieties, it's fascinating. Right, saying the beautiful coast there's just wonderful coastlines. It's not as touristic as other places, right? If Tuscany or Piemonte for wines, you go to Marche, there's amazing reds and whites, beautiful food, and great beaches too. So those are some of the vineyards in Castelli di Jesi. Sorry, I put lots of pictures because nobody has traveled for a long time. And it's nice. I'm like, oh. All right, so you're slightly, this is in Verdicchio, you're slightly inland, so you're getting closer. You have the mountains before the Apennines, right? There's no vineyards in Italy where you don't see mountains, right? And so that's the wine we had, the GranCasale, Verdicchio dei Castelli di Jesi. It says on the back label, I said here it's all stainless steel. Botti, does anybody know what botti is? Right? When we talk about wine and we think about barrels, right? We often think about the small ones, right? You see a winery and you see all the barrels lined up super neatly, right? And they're about this size. Those are barriques, they're 225 liters. The Italians work a lot with bigger barrels, the botti or the botti, and they're like 1,000 liters, if not 2,000. They're huge, right? And very often made of chestnut wood or oak from Slavonia, around Slovenia and Croatia, but very old wood. They don't want, when a wine is aged in wood, when you say a wine is oaky, when it tastes and smells of toast and of caramel and it's because it's new oak, right? Old wood doesn't give the flavors of oak to the wine anymore. So it's used as a container, and it's used because it's porous, because the wine inside has a tiny bit of exchange with the oxygen, which changes the way it ages, right? But not new oak. Right? Italians don't, of course, everybody's experimented with different things, but traditional Italian wines, no new oak, old wood, big bottis. Right? There was even a war in Piemonte between Barolo producers, those who would use new oak and those who wouldn't. Anyhow, that's another story. So it does say on the bottle it did a little bit of oak, 10%, but you don't really feel it in the wine, right? So it's probably old oak, and there's very little of it. So the reason you would put a wine in old oak, why would you do it if it's not to get the aromas? Again, it's for that slight bit of oxygen you get, and it gives the wine a bit more. A wine in stainless steel is like this. A wine in oak is a bit more like that, right? And the more you leave it in oak, the more it. Yes. At what point does the wine go into the stainless steel? So this one it's fermented in stainless steel or in concrete, so in neutral vessels, and then for the aging after the fermentation, once it's wine, they will put it leave it in stainless steel and a part in botti. I don't know exactly how much, but yes, because the container also has a huge influence on, right? A lot of people like to say, oh, I want the wine to be made naturally, non-interventionist. There's no such thing as non-interventionist wine. You need a person to make the wine. You need a person to cultivate if you let a vine grow wild, it's not going to make good grapes for winemaking. What does a vine naturally do? It grows, branches and shoots, and grows and grows and grows, and the berries stay small and really tart and bitter, right? Why do we cut growing vines for wine is a bit like a bonsai, right? You cut the vine to concentrate the amount of grapes that are produced to have good sugar in the grapes, because sugar is what gives alcohol. So there is obviously human intervention in winemaking. If you crush grapes, put them in a jar, leave them outside, it'll ferment, but it'll turn to vinegar really quickly also. Okay? That's what happens naturally if you don't control it. Okay, so for the second white, we're going up to Veneto in the northeast of Italy. Okay? So there's Garda Lake right there. Sorry, I don't have a pointer. And then you're going up into Trentino Alto Adige. To the extreme east is Friuli Venezia Giulia. and then in between those two, in the backland of Venezia, the city, you have Veneto, which is mostly, we can divide very globally into two parts. Around Garda Lake, which we'll come back to at the very end with an Amarone, that's where you have Valpolicella. Right? And then in the hills, completely to the east, in the hills above Venezia, that's where Prosecco is made. Right? So it is also a specific area, even though Prosecco has gotten quite big right now. But the Classico zones of Prosecco in Conegliano Valdobbiadene and in Colli Assolani, those are really the Classico, the heart part of Prosecco. Right? And there's vineyards everywhere in between, but those are really kind of the two big conglomerates. So the second one you have, those are not unknown, right? Verdicchio is known. But as I said, in Marche, there's other grapes called Pecorino, called Passerina, that make really, really cool whites. This is Soave, so we're in that part closer to Garda Lake, but Soave is the first one to the east. You have Soave, then Valpolicella, then Bardolino. Right? Those are three quite well-known appellations of Veneto. And Soave is for whites, right? Valpolicella makes only reds. Soave make only whites, and the main grape variety here is Garganega. Right? This is just Soave Classico. So that other map was a bit maybe too small, but there's all of Soave, and then about 1/5 of all of Soave is Soave Classico. That's Soave Classico, and you see all those different colors? Those are all single vineyards. So those have all been mapped out as places that are different from the others. They don't have the same soil or the same slope or the same exposure, right? And that makes for differences. So a winemaker who has grapes in different areas we usually make a wine out of each area. And then we'll try them. If he finds them great, might bottle them on their own. He might decide to blend them. Those are personal decisions of the winemaker. Right? But just to show you how complex it can get. And this down here is the town of Soave, and there's a castle in the town of Soave, and we'll get to it. But vineyards again, right? You always have, as I said, there's hills, there's usually hills everywhere, right? So there's always, and if, I don't know which direction it is, but if it's facing north on a clear day, then you would see the Dolomites and the Alps, right? This is Pieropan. It's the brand new winery they built probably just 7 or 8 years ago. Pieropan is one of the top producers by far in Soave. I should give you, we probably send them, but I should give you the prices. It's always interesting to know. The first one, the Verdicchio, was $23.95. This one is $44. Right? So Pieropan makes a Soave Classico, which is usually around $20, $25. Beautiful wine, a little bit in the spirit of a Chablis, except that if it was Chablis, it would be twice the price. Right? This, La Rocca, they have 2 single vineyards, Calvarinho and La Rocca. And La Rocca is just below, that's the La Rocca vineyard, which is just below the castle in Soave. Right? And that single vineyard is called Monte Roqueta. That's where La Rocca comes from. It's, there's not only Garganega grown, they also do Trebbiano di Soave, which is not Trebbiano. Actually, Trebbiano di Soave is Verdicchio. Yeah, that grape from the Marche. Telling you, it's never easy. It's always complicated. But most of the great Soaves are 100% Garganega. I don't know if you notice, the color is a bit darker. I was just, the Verdicchio is 2018, they're the same vintage. They're both 2018. This one is a bit darker. Does it smell different? What does it smell like? Fruit? Not fruit. Again, right? Not fruit. Leather? Wood? Honey? There's a little bit of all of that, right? There's something almost when you say wood, when you say leather, almost more vegetal than fruit. There's definitely some honey. Is there something salty? Somebody say salty? There's something.
Maybe it's just because I know there's something slightly smoky. Huh? That's maybe what made you think of oak. I don't, let's see. When you're on, see, so 500 liter and 2,000 liter barrels, so huge barrels. So I'm thinking there's no new oak on this. Right? You know what makes it smoky? Let's try it first. It is saline too, no? There's good acidity, makes your mouth water. There is an impression, but there's no new oak on this, I'm sure. Soave has very specific soils, volcanic soils, and very often wines on volcanic soils, you get something remindful of smokiness, of flint. Think of gunpowder, flinty, right? And even on the finish, it keeps on. Yeah, it's remindful of oak, but it's not quite oak, right? There's something, and there's a texture to it. There's still those honey notes are there, almost like dried honey. But it keeps on evolving, and this is a wine that you could put down in your cellar for 20 years, right? This will age as much as any great Burgundy, and once again, if this was Burgundy, it would be twice the price, right? Just saying. But yeah, so this is, the thing is, when you go up in price in wine, you have to be careful. It's like the higher the price goes, the less the quality price ratio is interesting. Do I make sense? A $200 bottle will never be 10 times as good as the best $20 bottle. As price goes up, that price quality ratio diminishes. Right? Because of everything that it takes to make a great wine is more and more costly, and you can get less return. So, okay? The best value wines will always be, the more bang for your buck will always be in the $15 to $60 range. Right? Above that, you're starting to pay for a lot of things other than just really what's in the glass. Okay? I'm still tasting it. When we talk about how long a wine is, when we talk about length of a wine, that's how long it stays in your mouth. I'm talking, and I still, that taste is there, and it keeps on evolving, right? So really complete wine. It's not, I was going to say it's not a big wine. It's about, I'm just looking at alcohol, it's 13%. So it's not huge, right? Yet it fills them out. Alcohol is not always it's definitely not directly linked to quality, right? There's some of the world's greatest wines that have less than 10% alcohol, right? And it's not necessarily linked with body also, right? Some wines that are lighter in alcohol can feel much fuller than others that are higher, right? There's always many variables. Any comments or questions on this? Do you like this? I love this. I'm sorry, I chose wines I like also. So. Okay, what food will we pair with this? Okay. Again, I'm thinking because of the salinity, anything out of the sea, but there's a richness to it, right? So with the cheese, it's good. Anything from the sea, but whereas with the previous, the Verdicchio, I would have stayed with grilled, lemon, olive oil. This can stand up to fish in a sauce, right? Even a cream sauce. Instead of having fresh oysters, you can bake them, you can gratiner them, you can, right? It can stand up to a bit more richness. Think of in Veneto, right? They cook a lot with vegetables also, right? Rice with peas, or rice with vegetables, or a vegetable risotto, or, right? So a risotto with mushrooms, right? Something that has richness, it could stand up to it. Yes, there was a question back there. Yes, no, I didn't say it. Thank you for asking. Alcoholic fermentation, very simply, is the sugar in the grape juice that is transformed into alcohol by yeasts. Okay? Yeasts eat the sugar and transform it into alcohol and CO2. Hence the link between sugar and alcohol, right? So once your yeasts have no more sugar to feed on, once all the sugar's been converted to alcohol, the yeasts die off, and those are what we call lees, right? So very often after fermentation, they will just slowly deposit to the bottom of the container in which the wine is fermenting, and the wine can be left on the lees for a certain time. because it kind of also still feeds off of that. There's a lot of amino acids, I think it is, but it gives fatness to the wine. So right here, the 1 year on the lees, so a little bit of that creaminess we get on the palate, that comes from the lees. When you smell cream, yogurt, almonds, it's very often from lees aging. And so it gives that aromatic character, a slightly lactic character, but especially that kind of creamy mouthfeel. Okay? Champagne. Champagne or Franciacorta, or any wines that are made like champagne, they're also left on the lees for a long time. That's where they get that toasty, brioche-like character. Follow up? No. Okay. All right. Questions or comments on that one? Okay. I got on time. We're going completely south now. Sicily. For the third wine that's in your glass. So the reds, we'll see. I'll see what the temperature is like, but somebody asked even before we started, what about temperatures? Super important question. It completely changes how a wine tastes. 2 or 3 degrees of difference changes everything. Any wine too warm is not good, okay? Unless you want to get rid of your guests, that's a good. Serve red wine warm, that will do it, okay? But the opposite is true. I'm from the restaurant business. You serve a table of 4, a bottle of warm red wine, they won't order a second one. Serve it slightly chilled, they will order a second one because they'll drink it much quicker at the right temperature, right? Try it. Oh yeah, so if you don't know, nobody walks around with a thermometer, right, checking their wine temperature. Take your whites out of the fridge 20 minutes before serving them, unless it's 45 degrees outside and you're eating outside, okay? In which case, always keep a bucket with ice and water by the table if you're eating outside, even for the reds, because once again, at 40 degrees, they're really not good. But general rule of thumb, take the whites out of the fridge 20 minutes before you serve them. Put the reds in the fridge 20 minutes before you serve them. Okay? All the reds here went through the fridge for, especially the first 2, for about an hour before we started. Well, it's because I knew we wouldn't taste them right away, right? So I'm counting how much will they warm up once they're in your glass, but we'll see how the temperature is. Sicily. For the longest time, the l'usine à vin, Italy's wine factory, right? Like the Languedoc was to France. It was pumping up big volumes of really low-end cheap wine, right? And it really tarnished its image also. I don't know how much wine from Sicily ended up in great bottles of Bordeaux or Burgundy, right? Because in the days when, before global warming, when it was still a challenge in a lot of region to ripen the grapes every year, a bad year in Bordeaux, the grapes were really unripe, the wines were really green, they were not very sellable. Bring in a little bit of wine from Sicily and throw it in there to bring it some sunshine and some warmth, and right? It's a known practice. Of course, it's not done today officially, or it's illegal. But yeah, for the longest time, Sicily was by far the largest producing region of Italy, right? Veneto, Puglia, and Sicily kind of had turns taking that on, but Sicily for the longest time was, and now once again, and so much of Sicily was uprooted and replanted with Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and Chardonnay. It's almost sad. But now, again, Sicily, like every other region in Italy, has an amazing array of indigenous grape varieties, and now we can't get enough of them. We're going to talk, there's the far west, around Palermo, and Marsala is also made there. And Marsala there is such a thing as really, really good Marsala. It's not all the cheap stuff you buy for cooking, right? It was a great wine in the history of Sicily. It went through a really industrial phase also, but there's a few diehard producers who kept on making really, really good Marsala. And so that's where you'll have a lot of the plains of the larger vineyards, a bit inland from the west, and where you have a lot of those international grape varieties. But even there's great wines being made everywhere now. In the southeast, around, that's where Nero d'Avola is originally from, near the town of Avola. Nero d'Avola is, I think, the most planted red grape variety in Sicily. Right? Nero d'Avola and Frappato. Cerasuolo di Vittoria is Sicily's only DOCG. I didn't mention this at the very beginning, but the hierarchy of appellations in Italy, right? You have table wine or just Italian wine, I'll say wine from Italy. Then you have IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica, or how do they call it? And they have different names within the European Union. IGP, PGO, protected, IGP is French, Protected Geographic, PDO, Protected Designation of Origin. DOC and DOCG is what you want to know. Okay? So DOC is like the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée in France, like Denominazione de Origen in Spain. That's the appellation system, and DOCG is reserved for the better wines in each region. Okay? So every region has, Piemonte I think has like 17 DOCGs, Sicily has 1. Right? Not that they don't make lots of great wine, but that's also, then you get into politics and administration, and it's another story. But Cerasuolo di Vittoria, great wines made from Frappato, from Nero d'Avola in the southeast. The one you have in your glass, so the first red, your third glass of wine, is from that square you see there, which is Etna. Right? Etna is one. Sicily's actually went from being the big wine industry, the big wine factory of Italy, to being one of the coolest, most dynamic places wine-wise in Italy right now. Everybody's crazy about Sicilian wine, especially wines from the Etna. Go to any trendy wine bar in New York, in Tokyo, or in Paris, there will be wines from the Etna. Okay? The grape variety there is Nerello Mascalese. There's also Nerello Cappuccio, but Nerello Mascalese is the star. The wine here is a blend of both. It's 80% Nerello Mascalese and 20 Nerello Cappuccio. And they do a lot of whites too. And actually, Sicily's most planted white is very planted on the Etna. It's called Caricante. Right? It's actually one, just to tell you how much there is grapes planted in Sicily, I think it's Italy's #1 planted red grape variety, Catarratto, and it's almost only in Sicily. Right? So it just tells you how much there is there. So Etna is that, I don't know if you see that little kind of croissant shaped, right? That's vineyards all around the Etna on the slopes, some of them extremely steep. A lot of them have been abandoned. First of all, it's a really extreme place. It's an active volcano, right? I mean, you're farming. Viticulture is farming, right? Already hard work, and you never know when your fields are going to disappear, right? And it's happened, and they start over again. Some vineyards are hundreds of years old. They're like deep into volcanic ash and volcanic soils. Talk about somewhereness. This place is, and it's so high because a lot of the vineyards are mostly from like 600 to 1,000 meters in height. Okay? At 1,000 meters, it's pretty much cooler than it is down by the sea. Right? You lose like a degree every 100 meters or something like that. So there's a huge difference between day and night, between the temperature. It can be extremely windy. It's, kind of an extreme place to grow grapes. And it makes wines that are very, very singular. Right? So that you see, again, the mountains, right? I was talking about more plains towards the west, and the northeast being quite mountainous, with Mount Etna really sticking out there. That's just a breakup of how much vineyards are in, no, not how much vineyards, but how much of the whole land consists of mountains, of plains, or of hills. And there you go. That's a vineyard in the Etna. So these walls are, because some of the vineyards are so steep, if they don't want everything just to wash down every time it rains or from erosion, they had to build walls. And also just to be able to work them. By building walls, you make terraces so you can actually work on the flat for a couple of rows of vines, and then, rather than working, like this all the time. And these are obviously not mechanizable. You don't go there with a tractor. There's no room for a tractor, right? Maybe a horse, donkey, but most of the work is done by hand. Huh? It's pretty impressive as a landscape. And so it's crazy because and that's the other view. That's from some vineyards on the Etna and looking out towards the sea, which is also very close, right? And it's crazy the difference just from Etna to the west and to the southeast. Completely different climate, completely different soils, completely different wines. Did you notice how pale this is? When I'm looking at the color intensity of a wine, that's why you want something white. So use your napkins as opposed to, and I always look if I can see my finger through it, or if I can read through it, right? A Cabernet Sauvignon or a Shiraz will be much darker, much deeper in color. You can't see through. This is very pale. It's a little bit like there's another grape variety that's world famous, that's very pale and very delicate. It's Pinot Noir. Okay? And a lot of people compare Nerello Mascalese to Pinot Noir. And seriously, on the Etna, that little strip of land, that little croissant we saw, is divided into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small parcels that all have their own different character. Right? So one grape, Nerello Mascalese, but lots of different vineyards, lots of different microclimates that give different expressions. Still not fruity, right? I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of cherry, but it's not tutti frutti, right? It's not like strawberry jam. Yeah. Anything else? There's no wrong answer. A hint of vanilla? There's a little bit of fruit, and the fruit is kind of on the tartar side, right? Like kind of sour cherry, a little bit cranberry. And then there's a distinct earthiness to it also. Does it do? See, it does some chestnut barrels and oak barrels, but it doesn't say if they're new or not, right? The vanilla you would get from new oak. So maybe there's a little bit of new oak that gives it that slight vanilla character. How is it on the palate? Dry, bone dry. It's Italian. How's the acidity? Is your mouth watering? Right? So there's that freshness again, and that freshness is so important in making wines versatile with food. Right? It makes you salivate. Salivate activates your appetite, makes you hungry. It's a perfect thing, right? That's exactly what you want. You don't want a wine that will saturate you. You want a wine that will make you want to eat and spend time at the table and have another glass. I always say the best wine, it's not complicated. Put all the bottles on the table. The first bottle that's empty, that's the best wine. It's the one you want to drink more of. Okay? Does everybody understand what tannins are? Tannins is something we have in red wines, right? We often associate it with big, full-bodied wines. It's there's not a lot here. There's almost none. There's very little. It's that very, very dry and gritty feeling. We'll get some as we move on with the reds. You want to know what tannins are once and for good? Go to the grocery store, buy some red grapes, peel them, right? And chew on red grape skins for a few minutes. That's where the tannins are. So you'll really understand. It's like over-steeped tea. Tea also has tannin. So if you let it steep too long, it becomes bitter, it becomes drying, right? But there's also a tactile kind of grit to it. That's what tannins are. But do the chewing grape skins. You could also chew on the stem of grapes, but it's even more unpleasant. So this is not a very tannic red, it's exactly the profile of Pinot Noir. Light-bodied, high acid, little tannin, sour red fruit, right? But it's different. It's Italian. And it's got that volcanic soil thing going on again. There's a grit, but it's not tannin. There's like almost an earthiness to it, right? I don't want to say, we all say weird things as wine people. You know, we talk about eating earth and licking rocks. But seriously, those are the feelings we get sometimes with certain wines. And I definitely get that kind of earthiness, that potting soil kind of, which I love, right? What do you eat with that? Tannins, people will say, oh, you can't have red wine with fish, right? You can have whatever you want what makes you happy, right? The best wine and food matches is eat what you like and drink what you like with people you like, and it'll be perfect. But you can't serve red wine with fish. My husband doesn't drink white wine. We do eat fish. I mean, if I serve him the best white wine I think makes the best match in the world, he won't be happy. He doesn't like white wine, right? So start by doing what you like. But what interacts badly with fish in general for most people is tannins. Okay? Tannins react really, for a lot of people, it makes the wine turn metallic and harsh, and you lose all the fruit and all the charm of the wine, and you just stay with those really bitter, drying, harsh tannins. Okay? So you want red wine with fish, go for wine that has very little tannin. Okay? Pinot Noir is a general go-to, so is Gamay, but there's tons of Italians like that. Nerello Mascalese is one, right? There's a few Piemontese grapes also that have that. But so yeah, it's more of an elegant, on the lighter side that you could have with fish. Just prepare the fish in a red mode. Cook it with some tomatoes, with some pancetta, with some black olives, right? That's a great recipe for fish. With a wine like that, it's perfect. Right? And of course, all Italian reds go with salumi and antipasti in general. Comments or questions on this one? Are good? Are you having fun? Yeah. Okay, you're all so quiet. This one is Sicily, $35. Repeat the question. Sorry, the question was for the price, which is $35 for the Etna. Eh? They're not, so you might think, I've had much better wines at $20. Okay, and value is hugely important to me. I think but we have to think about the work that's involved in making a wine like this also, right? If you're in a huge plain where you're working with a tractor and you're doing big volumes, it's much easier, right, than in a place like Etna where everything is done by hand, tiny vineyards, right? The work is multiplied by 20, right? These are the kind of wines that you want to sit with and see them. All of these reds could have benefited from a carafe, okay? From pouring them in a carafe and letting them breathe a little bit. Right? And that's also fun to do if you're able to do it. I love to open up a bottle and drink it over 3 or 4 hours, right? You get back from work, or you pour yourself a glass, put it in the carafe, then have another later, and then have one with dinner, and see how it evolves in time. Yes? Yeah.
Okay, so you said that yeah, it is. Okay. You said that this is the wine that's becoming popular in a lot of different places. What about this type of wine is becoming appealing to the people that are running those types of establishments, in your view?
Well, I think first of all, there's the unicity, there's the singularity, there's the somewhereness. We don't want, I mean, you remember what I said about being afraid of the whole world becoming Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay? I mean, I drink wine every day. I'd be bored to death if I had to drink the same wine every day, right? It's like when they ask me for the desert island wine. I'm like, oh my God, that's a nightmare. I don't want to be stuck with one wine only. Imagine being stuck with one person only. No, I'm kidding. But, so I think there's that, I don't know if the word in English is right, singularity, the fact that a wine has its own character, is different from everything else, right? So there's that impression of, wow, I'm really getting a taste of Etna, right? Wine can transport you like that. That's a fabulous quality of it. And then, and as regarding the style, so the lighter ones, because that's also very much, we had a big kind of trend of going towards, remember when California wines were all the rage and the Napa Cabs, and some of them tasted like jam, dipped in oak, with vanilla poured over, right? It's like, am I eating cake or am I drinking wine? And that was because as North Americans in general, right, those of European descent might have a different upbringing, but wine culture is new. And yeah, so everybody tends to, I mean, first wines I drank were Blue Nun and Black Tower, right? Mateos, anybody? Yeah? Okay, so new wine drinkers tend to, you don't automatically go to acidity and bitterness. You go to sweetness. Sweetness is universal. Acidity and bitterness requires some learning. Except for Italian. I'm sorry, but if you compare, I don't want to make myself enemies here, but if you compare, an American-born, American-raised on corn syrup, they tend to have a much sweeter tooth, right? They like sweeter things. Italians have them. There's not a lot of people in the world that like bitterness like Italian do. I always say bitterness is a learned thing, right? I mean, try to give a baby endive puree or radicchio puree, they'll spit it right back at you, unless they're Italian, maybe. No? That appreciation of bitterness. You just look at the cuisine, all of the bitter greens and that are, right? So there's a very cultural thing to taste also. But so there's been a bit of a dial back from those overblown, jammy, oaky wines, candy wines, to something that's more delicate, that's more food-oriented, that you can actually sit down and drink a bottle of, right? Not be under the table after 2 glasses. Okay, questions? This one is 13%. Did you feel it as warm? No. Okay, didn't feel, right? And once again, that's a question of balance. The question was about the alcohol level of the wine, which is at 13%. And you were saying that, I asked, did you feel it as high? She said, no, not at all, right? And that's a good sign. And you can even have that with a wine that's 15%, right? It's all about balance. You can have a 12% wine that will leave you feeling like a burn and a 14% one that doesn't. Because you cannot isolate just one factor in the wine. It's all the overall balance. Okay, we're going to move on because we have 3 wines to taste in 15 minutes. No, I'm kidding. Almost, but... this will be fun. It's all fun, I hope. So Piemonte, we're in the far north west of Italy, on the beautiful coast there, Cinque Terre. This is in Liguria. This is one, if you don't know or have never seen, go home tonight and Google Cinque Terre. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth, and their vineyards come like crashing into the sea on super steep slopes. The whole village is it's a beautiful, beautiful place. But so above that, we have Piemonte. At the very top, closer to Switzerland, Valle d'Aosta, which is Italy's smallest wine region. Completely in the Alps, really, really fun wines. Again, lots of indigenous grapes that aren't grown anywhere else except in that tiny regions in the Alps. Some of Europe's highest vineyards, above 1,200 meters. Very cool. But Piemonte, all of this here. Piemonte is like the Mecca of Italy. Piemonte and Tuscany, and some would add Veneto. Anybody know the king of Piemonte? Barolo. That's the name of the wine, so the DOCG, the appellation. The grape is Nebbiolo, right? But I didn't bring you a Nebbiolo. But so those are 2 of the most Nebbiolos. Probably Nebbiolo and Sangiovese are the 2 most highly regarded grape varieties of Italy for red wines, right? Barolo is made from Nebbiolo, very often called the king of wines, and Barbaresco, the queen. They're both made from Nebbiolo, right? They're both just as good as one as the other. Different places, very close in the province of Cuneo in Piemonte, but far enough apart to be different. And Barbaresco always had this complex of not being as great as Barolo, but it can be just as great. There's good and there's bad everywhere, right? Even though Barolo is a DOCG and it's a very prestigious appellation, there are some bad Barolos, right? Just like there are some bad champagnes, just like there is some bad Burgundy, just like there's some bad... There's good and there's bad everywhere. And I often say, half joking, but not really, Italy and France may make more bad wine than anybody else just because they make more than anybody else. It's a question of proportion. That's it, right? Nobody, not one country, not one region has the monopoly on quality. There are great vineyards and great wines being made all over the world, right? Italy definitely has its fair share. So Barolo, around the town of Barolo and Barbaresco, so close to Alba in Cuneo, this is really the heartland of Nebbiolo and what Piemonte is mostly known for. Its most planted grape variety, I think, is Moscato. Okay, this is where Moscato d'Asti comes from. That's the better version. The other very industrial version is Asti Spumante, right? Remember that? Still lots of it. That's probably one of the largest production of wine in Italy is Asti Spumante, or just Asti. There are tons of great grape varieties in Piemonte other than Nebbiolo, right? Quite well known, Barbera makes really good wines, a bit more approachable than the wines of Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is a super tannic. So I was saying color's not a sign of quality or body. Nebbiolo is very pale colored. It's like the previous one we had from Sicily. Very, very pale in color. It's one of the most tannic grapes there is. Super tannic, right? So it's not because it's pale that it's light in body. It's often 14% alcohol, very tannic. These are highly ageable wines, okay? But then you have Barbera, Dolcetto. Dolcetto is one of my favorite kind of summer barbecue chill wines. Dolcettos are to Piemonte what Gamay or Beaujolais is to Burgundy, right? Gamay and Beaujolais is kind of those gluggable wines with a high drinkability factor. You chill them and you just chug them. No, I don't want to encourage any excesses, but they're easy to drink. Dolcetto is like that, okay? It's Italian, so it's very dry. There's always a little bit of tannin, there's always a little bit of grit, but really, really cool. Dolcetto d'Alba or Dolcetto d'Asti, okay? But again, there's dozens of grape varieties, including this one, which is in your second red wine glass or the fourth glass. What does that smell like? Talk louder. What does it smell like? Peaches? Lychee. Roses. It's floral, huh? It's very like roses, rosewater, Turkish delight. You know, basically like orange blossom, rosewater. It smells like walking into a Turkish pastry shop. Seriously. Huh? Sweet? But it's not sweet. It's dry. But it smells perfumey, right? Floral. When I put remember I was telling you about La Crema di Moro d'Alba before in Marche? Is that grape variety that is this is very similar to that. This is called Ruchè. This is a super old grape variety. There was probably just a few plants left 50 years ago. And then somebody stumbled onto it and say, what is this? I've never seen this plant before. Made some wine from it. This is really cool. And started, there's still today probably not much more than, I think, 200 hectares or, sorry, let's go a little bit, that's not very clear, but it's kind of, so this is Barolo and Barbaresco must be right next to it. And then Ruchè is up there, is in the blue part. Ruchè di Castagnole Monferrato. Castagnole Monferrato is the village, and Ruchè is a grape variety, right? So it's also specific to a certain area of Piemonte, right? And it's typical of this. That's the town of Castagnole Monferrato, right? This is in the province of Asti, so further north. I just can't get over how floral it is, right? And you're allowed to hate it. I mean, right? I mean, we all have our own. Taste is highly personal. Don't ever let anybody tell you you're wrong when you say, right, I don't like it, or it smells like this, or we all have our own personal taste. And on top of that, this is scientifically proven. There's not two people on the planet that smell or taste the same food or the same beverage exactly the same way. Our perception of aromas and taste is as individual as our DNA. Okay? So if I say cherry, or if I say, oh my God, this smells so much like roses, and you're like, Nothing's wrong with you. You don't need to go get your nose fixed, right? We don't have the same. Remember what I said before of just culturally, depending where you grew up, what kind of foods you've eaten all your life, we don't have the same tolerances. We don't have the same references. You said lychee earlier, and I always give that example. You read a book, it will tell you Gewürztraminer smells like lychee. The amount of people I have seen taste the Gewürztraminer for the first time in their life and say, oh, it smells like lychee because they read that, but they never ate a lychee in their life, that's useless. If you think it reminds you of the perfume of your grandmother, then that's what you should say. You have to use references that are your own. That's the only way you'll remember and you'll get better. Does it taste like roses too? Oh my, it does. Ooh, what else does it do? It burnt a little? All right, this one is 15% alcohol. It has this pretty, like, ooh, floral, but ooh. Something else, taste-wise. Bitter? Bitter. You get that? There's a distinct bitterness here. Kind of like almond bitter. Bitter almonds. Bitter almond. Right? There's a distinct bitterness here. And that's also something we find on more Italian reds than other reds. Again, right? That bitterness, that savory character. But it's, yeah, they make it in a particular way. So these are some of the vineyards around the winery. A bit more, and I think that's, again, looking to the north. It's a bit less. And so it's 100% Ruchè. I think we say Ruchè, huh? The CH? Yeah, like Chianti, right? Ruchè. So see, there's 20% harvested at over maturity. What does that mean? They let 20% hang a bit longer, so it becomes riper. It has a bit more sugar, hence the 15% alcohol, right? So I don't know why they do that. Maybe because you get more aromatics as you let the grapes hang longer, right? All grapes are different. Again, some you don't want to let them hang longer because they lose acidity very quickly when they ripen. And then if you have very little acidity, the wine becomes flabby and it loses the drinkability, the freshness. Okay? But very unique. And the question with that, what the heck do you serve with that, right? It's quite peculiar. They say, what did I had said something about bitters. Oh yeah, no, I was tasting them before I tried all the wines, huh? I sacrificed myself, hence the spittoon. I tried every single bottle we opened just to make sure you don't have a corked bottle. By the way, there was one. I opened, 30 bottles? There was one corked wine. And I kept the bottle. If ever anybody at the end has never had a corked wine before and you want to know what it smells like, okay, we kept that bottle. I think we always do that at Soave. At my wine bar, when staff opens up a bottle and it's corked, they know to ask everybody there that night, do you know what a corked wine is? Right? Too many people drink corked wines without knowing it's bad, and then just think, the wine isn't great, I won't buy it again. Not knowing that it's actually very faulty. Right? I tried the wine and I wrote down instinctively a steak with Salsa Verde. Again, that bitterness, right? So Salsa Verde made with lots of herbs. The real Salsa Verde will have a bit of anchovies in there. But the bitterness that you get from herbs. And still with a steak, something, right, that can stand up to the body of this wine. But I want something to go play on the bitterness. If you have a little bit of bitterness in the food, it will kind of match the bitterness in the wine and make it less, right, apparent. They say blue cheese. I'm not sure about it because blue cheese usually requires a little bit of sweetness because it's so strong, right? But who knows? Questions, comments on that one? Right? And this is one of, I just wanted to, they have at Montalbera, the producer, so this is the Morando family, they've been there for 6 generations. And they have 82 hectares of Ruchè, which is, I'm thinking, probably half of the Ruchè out there. Right? There's not much more than 200 hectares. So this is just one of hundreds of other grape varieties throughout that have, and a lot of them are this distinctive, right? How fun is that? You could drink a different Italian wine every day of the year and drink a different wine for the whole year, and probably for a few years more. Okay, now, most planted grape variety, red, in Italy is Sangiovese. Nebbiolo is very finicky, like Pinot Noir. It just likes the cold. So there's no Nebbiolo further south than Piemonte. You might find a bit in Emilia-Romagna, there's a tiny bit in Liguria, but seriously, it's mostly in Piemonte, Lombardy, and Valle d'Aosta. Sangiovese, on the other hand, is much less finicky. It's all over, except in Piemonte. It stops in Liguria. Okay? So it doesn't like, it's too cold in Piemonte for Sangiovese. Other than that, it's everywhere, from the northeast all the way to the south to Sicilia, but it doesn't make great wines everywhere. Further in the south, the hotter climate, it tends to make more ordinary, everyday wines. It doesn't have the grace that it has in Tuscany. Okay? And so Tuscany is that, no, I was going to say a square in the middle. No, up on top. I think I have a better map. Okay? So that's all of Tuscany. So this is the coast, right? Alba. What you see in dark brown, that's Chianti. Remember I told you Chianti Classico, not the same? In ochre, in the middle, Chianti Classico. Okay? So the heart of the Chianti, where the very best terroirs are, where over centuries, it's been recognized over time that the best wines come from that area. Okay? Chianti Classico. So there's a whole bunch of different appellations within Chianti. And then, hello? Hello? We're good? What'd you do? That's funny, he barely moved. Yeah, so the one we have in, and other famous appellations, right? But mostly Sangiovese. Morellino di Scansano is Sangiovese, Vino Nobili di Montepulciano is Sangiovese, Brunello di Montalcino is Sangiovese. Right? Probably the two top appellations considered giving the better wines from Sangiovese are Chianti Classico and Brunello di Montalcino. Brunello di Montalcino tends to make bigger wines, riper, fuller bodied. It is slightly warmer. And Chianti Classico, we're really up in the hills. And even within Chianti Classico, so that's just Chianti Classico, you have different, those are all the villages, the communes that are allowed to produce Chianti Classico, and they now have their own appellations, right? So they'll make a difference between the Chianti from Gaiole and from Rada. They don't taste the same. They don't have the same terroir, right? And your classical vista of Tuscany, right? Yeah, right? Don't we just want to go there? The rolling hills, the cypresses, the olive trees. And it's something I didn't mention, but it's true for most of Italian vineyards, biodiversity, right? Remember I said there's no big swath of the vineyards. It's a lot of small pockets because of the mountains everywhere and the forests everywhere. And they preserve, right? Tuscany is great for hunting. There's tons of game. And they go hunting in the hills, right? So there's forests everywhere. And that's like that in a lot of Italy. Biodiversity, you know, fruit trees and olive trees in the vineyards and other cultures within. It used to be anyhow, hundreds of years ago, they didn't have all these neat rows of Sangiovese and then further down other grape. It was all mixed up. Everybody had their little plot of vineyards to make their home wine. And it was all mixed. Most people didn't even know what was in the vineyards, right? It was white and red, all mixed, different grapes. They picked everything together, crushed it all together, and that was how wine was made. It's quite recent that we've started separating everything like that. Right? So, in your glass, the penultimate one, see how it's getting darker? But Sangiovese, again, I can still see through it. Sangiovese is rarely opaque. Brunello di Montalcino, a bit more because it's often aged in new oak. Sangiovese, again, and this is a super traditional one, it's made in old oak. Right? So this is a Chianti Classico, so from that, the heart of the region, and it's a Reserva, which means the different terms have different obligations in terms. So a plain Chianti, you could pick the grapes, crush them, let it ferment, bottle it. In less than 6 months, the wine's on the market. Okay? A Chianti Classico Riserva requires a minimum of 2 years of aging. Okay? So here we have 20 months. No, French oak barriques, really? Huh, I would have sworn this was all butty. If it's French oak barriques, I don't think there's any new, right? Because I'm not getting new oak on this. Again, that new oak is when you get a lot of chocolate and coffee and toast aromas. When I talk about savory, Sangiovese to me really embodies what I mean by savory. Yes, there's some fruit, but there's so many other things. There's like tobacco leaf, there's forest floor, there's also cherry, there's like, and at the same time, there's sour cherry and there's dried cherry. There's sour fruit and there's really, really sweet, almost dried fruit. Almost like tomato leaf, but really tobacco and forest floor. And there's something, I call it twiggy. It reminds me of twigs. It reminds me of branches. It reminds me of tree bark. Yes, I do smell tree bark. And then on the palate, this one should have some tannins. Feel that? That drying, it feels like it's sucking the saliva out of your gums. Those are tannins. Okay? Those are tannins. Actually, it's interesting because I'll let you try. Red wine, I said tannins and fish don't really go well together unless you really like that very tannic, drying feeling. Same thing with cheeses. The runnier, the smellier they are, the less appropriate they are for tannins. You want to serve a red wine that's tannic, which is often the red wine we finish with the meal, and then you want to serve cheese. The harder the cheese, the better it is for tannic red. So like the cheeses you have. There's a Parmesan. I don't know what the other one is, but it looks hard. Anyhow, the Parmesan looks extremely crumbly. The crumblier the cheese, the better it is with tannic red wines. And it actually makes the tannins melt away. So try, I don't know if it will, but try the Chianti. See how it feels, like that tactile feeling from the tannins? Then try the cheese and try the wine again. Normally, it should really make the wine less tannic. I'm going to see if what I say works, otherwise you're all going to look at me funny.
Hi, excuse me?
Huh? Yes.
Hi. I've always wondered about the role of tannins. Like why I guess maybe this is a naive question, but why do some wines have more tannins, less tannins? Is it the way they're fermented? Is it the grape? Is it the...
Good question.
Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? You know.
I just tried it and made the tannins melt away. Seriously. Sorry, I'm always amazed. Every time I do that, I'm like, my God, they just disappeared. Steak, and I'll come back to it. Super easy. Summer's coming around, barbecue season, buy 2 steaks. Same cut. Sorry for the vegetarians. Do them really simply. You can season them, but simple. Just cook 2 of the same steaks, 1 well done and 1 rare. Okay? Try a tannic wine. Get a Chianti Classico Riserva. With the well-done steak, the tannins are just going to stick out like if it was fish or blue cheese. With the rare steak, they're going to melt away, just like with the Parmesan. Okay? Don't ask me the chemistry behind it. It has something to do with the protein in the... So, tannins are in the skins of red grapes. Okay? There are some in whites, but white wines are made without the skin. They are an antioxidant. They are a preservative. I don't know what their role exactly is in the plant. I don't know if there's agronomists or... but in wine, they really act as a preservative. So because you want the color, in the skins, there's when you go to the grocery store and buy your red grapes and peel them, you'll notice that the flesh inside is white. 95% of red grapes have a white flesh, which means you can make white wine with red grapes. You just squeeze them and take the skins away and just ferment the juice. Okay? But red wines, you want color, so you leave the skins in. But in the skins, you don't only have the color, you have the tannins. Hence, you have tannins in red wines. But not all grapes are created equal. Okay? Cabernet Sauvignon, a tannic grape, is a very small berry with very thick skins. Pinot Noir, which has very little tannin, is a very big grape with a very small skin. So the skin to juice ratio isn't the same. So that will determine how much tannin you have in the wine. And then it depends what the winemaker wants to do. The more he leaves the skins in with the juice, the more extraction of color, of tannin. But at one point, it becomes too much. And then you get all the bitterness from the tannins. So even that's, right, an art right there, just to know how long will you let it macerate. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay. So it depends on the grape for the amount of tannin and depends on the winemaking. And also depends on the terroir. Some places will produce grapes. If it's a really, really harsh, extreme place, naturally the grapes tend to grow thicker skins, just like, right, to protect themselves. So those are reasons why there would be more or less tannin. And then the role in wine is all wines that have great ageability usually have some amount of tannin. Right? So Chianti Classico, Barolo, Bordeaux are all wines that you can age, and again, not all of them, and they're usually wines that have a lot of tannin. Tannin in red wine and acidity in white wines is kind of the backbone for long-term aging. And tannins can be, if people think they have allergies, or a lot of people think, oh, a lot of people think they're allergic to sulfites. First of all, sulfites are supernatural, right? Our body produces them. There is no such thing as a wine without sulfites. Alcoholic fermentation produces sulfites. So there's only such a thing as a wine without added sulfites. If you have problems when drinking wine and you think sulfites are the culprits, eat some dried fruit. Dried apricots have about 200 times more sulfites than any wine. Right? There's way more sulfites in frozen foods and processed foods, especially in dried fruit, for example. But tannins, if you're sensitive to histamines, for example, tannins can be the culprit for your malaise with headaches and so on with red wine. So there's lots of wines without tannins. Okay? I'll always find you a solution rather than not drinking at all. Okay. So let's move on to our last wine, and we're going back to the Veneto. And still close to Garda Lake, but moving in closer to Garda Lake from Soave in the Valpolicella zone. Okay? So Valpolicella is, if we get closer, right? So we had Soave further there, and then Valpolicella and Bardolino's right next to the lake. That's another beautiful place. I should have put a picture of Lake Garda, but and Valpolicella, also a Valpolicella Classico zone, right? Its own grape varieties. What's the one we just had with Sangiovese? So Valpolicella, grape varieties that are not grown anywhere else but there. Corvina, Rondinella, Molinara, Corvinone. Classical grapes of all wines from Valpolicella are made with those. They're not grown anywhere else. They don't make wines in Tuscany. They don't make wines in Puglia. They don't make wines anywhere outside of Italy. Okay? Again, that uniqueness of all those indigenous grape varieties. Valpolicella, simple Valpolicella, I used to call it the Beaujolais of Italy. It's the kind of simple red wine that you would chill. It's not super complex. Chill, everyday pizza wine, pasta wine, right? Just a well-made, simple, light wine. Valpolicella Classico will be a bit more complex, but then you have the big brother of them all, which is Amarone. Okay? And that's the last wine in your glass, and that's the Sangiovese was 14.5%. Okay? But again, I didn't talk about, but anyhow, that savoriness, and it's, to me, I like it because it's relatively easy to recognize when you taste them blind, because again, it has such a distinctive character. And I just love that savoriness. But so Amarone here, watch out, this is 16.5% alcohol. But if you ever see a bottle of Amarone that is less than 14.5, even less than 15, something's wrong. Okay? Remember the Ruchè? Some of it, they left it on the vine to over-ripen, to get more sugar. So Amarone is the same thing. We're concentrating the grapes to get more sugar, but they're doing it after they pick the grapes, and they let them dry. Okay? So, vineyards in Valpolicella. And this is very often done in attics with the windows open because you want a lot of air to circulate because you don't want the grapes to rot. But they put them out on, sometimes it's straw mat, sometimes it's clay, but they're all in these rooms. They're picked, and they put them there, and legally they have to dry a minimum of 2 or 3 months, I think. There's a legal minimum. So what happens when the grapes dry? They lose sugar, they concentrate acidity, they lose water. Did I say sugar? They lose water, they dehydrate, right? So the sugar is more concentrated. Hence, it'll make higher alcohol wines. And then those are fermented, but it makes for very full-bodied wines. Amarone della Valpolicella. There's a sweet version also. Actually, Amarone back in the days used to always be sweet. Wines used to be sweet altogether, generally much more hundreds of years ago than they are today. But Recioto della Valpolicella, if you like sweet things, it's a beautiful sweet wine. There's also Recioto di Soave. Remember the Soave, the second one we have? So Recioto is made from dried grapes, but they make these sweet wines. Amarone is made with dried grapes, but they let all the sugar ferment fully, hence the high alcohol. Okay? If you don't let all the sugar, you can, by adjusting the temperature or doing certain other things, you can stop the fermentation before all the sugar is converted, and hence you have a sweet wine. Right? But Amarone should be dry, even if there's an impression of sugar. What does it smell like? Again, right, even though it's a very rich and there's a lot of fruit and stuff going on in this wine, it's not tutti frutti. There's never, right? There's never that. There's always lots of savory notes to it. Do you smell anything? It smells sweet, right? So it doesn't smell like, remember the first reds we had where the fruit was tartar, like sour cherry? This is more like dried cherry, right? Or cherry jam.
Hello?
There's the drying of the grapes. Seems like a logical thing, but makes a wine that has aromas of dried fruit. Almost a little bit, not port-like, but a little bit of dried fig, raisins. Yes?
Hi, my name's Lydia. I'm one of the organizers, and I'm monitoring YouTube, and there's a question on YouTube. So somebody is wondering, any tips for navigating Italian wines when you have a sulfite sensitivity and need a lower sulfite content to be able to enjoy it?
Yes, in that case, you have to find, unfortunately, what you have to find is the right person to advise you. There are more and more, again, right, as I was saying, we're steering away from those big, jammy, oaky wines. We're also slowly steering away from so much chemicals in the vineyards and in winemaking in general. So you need to look for people that are working organically or biodynamically. So when you're certified organic or certified biodynamic, which are cultivation methods that are certified by third bodies, there are limits on how much sulfites can be added. So an organic wine will have less sulfites than a conventional wine. A biodynamic wine will have even less. And then what we call natural wines, but that's where you have to get advice because there's no certification. Right? So at Soave, we serve only that. I can guarantee you a night with no headache. But if you go to a wine store, if you go to the LCBO, if you go to a restaurant, you can ask for wines that have no sulfites added or very, very little. And once again, right? And I mean, back in the days, those Mateus and Black Tower and Blue Nun, they were shot with sulfites. Those were horrible, because it was also at a time when we didn't fully understand how much to use. And they were also, just like tannins, antioxidants, preservatives, right? Antibacterials. So people just put tons to make sure they'd have no problems without, caring for the fact that you'd wake up with a horrible headache the next day. Today, people understand much better how much to use, how to use it, and there's a definite trend to use much less. But again, the more you have to ask and get good advice about it.
I also just want to let you know it's 10 to 9.
Yeah,
so I just
we're finishing.
Just want to be sensitive to people's schedules.
Yeah, so we're finishing with this wine. Any other aromas other than the dried fruit and... The question was if organic wines are better or what makes them different. As I said earlier, nobody has the monopoly on quality. There's good and there's bad everywhere. There's good and there's bad organic wines. There's good and there's bad biodynamic wines, and there's good and there's bad natural wines. I'm sorry, it's a terrible, that's why we have jobs. That's why. Right? But seriously, there's so little information on a bottle of wine. You're basically buying blind. You can read about it. You can, right? If you don't want to spend hours researching, find the right people. And you go to a restaurant, you go to a bottle shop, you go to the LCBO, find somebody that you can talk with. If somebody tries to recommend a wine to you without asking a couple of questions first, and they don't know you, I'd run away, right? They're going to recommend something they like. I will always ask you a couple of questions first because I need to understand what you like, right? We don't like the same things. But once again, there's no easy answer for that. But normally, just because they are made with less intervention, with less additives, right? They're healthier wines, and they're more terroir driven. They have more that sense of somewhereness. It really felt, so this wine tastes to me now completely different from when I first tried it 2 hours ago. It's much more open. It's really on that raisiny side, like dried raisin, almost raisin tart. There's that richness on the palate, and that's the sweetness of alcohol. The wine is dry, but it feels sweet, right? Alcohol has sweetness to it. Don't do this at home, but if you have a glass of water and another glass of water with a little bit of rubbing alcohol in it, or vodka, that one will taste sweet, even though there's no sugar. Alcohol is a form of sugar, right? Yes?
What happens when there's certain wines that they say to let breathe?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, and why does that happen? And do some wines need it and some wines don't?
Yeah, and there's no universal rule, but with this one, right? See, I just realized it. As tasting it now, I'm like, oh boy, this is much better with 2 hours in the glass. So, but definitely, usually more full-bodied wines will benefit from aeration. That means just opening the bottle is not really enough because you just have that much opening, right? So pour it in a carafe. It can be a plastic jug if that's all you have. You don't need a fancy crystal decanter. Just pour it in a container that's open enough where it can air. But go back to it and try it because some wines might not like that much air. General rule of thumb, the lighter they are, the more chill you want to serve them, and they don't need aeration. The more full-bodied they are, the slightly higher in temperature, and the more aeration they will take. And the younger they are. Wines are just like us. The older they become, the more fragile they become. And so if people think, oh, I should only put in a carafe very old wines, I will always taste a wine, young or old, before putting it in a carafe. If it feels very light and on the brink of crashing, I will not put it in a carafe. That strong contact with air might just kill it in the purpose of finishing on time and letting everybody who needs to go. I will stop here, but I'll be here for a few minutes. If any of you have more questions, if any of you want to, I'll go grab that bottle of corked wine. If anybody wants to smell it, just grab one of your glasses. And thank you you have been so attentive. Thank you so much.
Wow. Okay, so hands up if you learned something. Right? Like so much that you want to watch the replay, because I sure do. I wasn't able to catch all that because I was running around, but I'm definitely going to be watching the replay. I feel like every minute there was something new that I learned. By the way, my name is Lydia DiFrancesco. I'm the co-chair of the board of directors for Italian Week, and I just want to thank you so much for coming and participating to our event tonight. It was truly a pleasure to be able to have you. And like I said, we have the replay. It's going to be on YouTube. We'll make sure that you get the link for that. We'll also send a reminder with the wine list in case you want to now go. If you have a favorite, I know I tried the one from Sicily, right? Number 4? Yeah, number 4. I really like that one. And that's the one from Sicily, which makes sense because I'm half Sicilian.
No,
it's not the Sicily one.
That's a roses one.
Which one was it?
Ruchè. The roses.
Roses.
Ruchè.
Ruchè. Cool. Also, I recently just tried sparkling red, and it's really good. Highly recommend. I don't know what kind it is. My husband bought it. Anyway, thank you to Sala San Marco for hosting us, and I also want to thank Chef's Paradise for providing us with our wine glasses tonight. And I want to invite you to come to our grand finale weekend. It is starting tomorrow on Preston Street, tomorrow evening, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. Lots of performers and animations on the street, live artists, all sorts of good fun. So visit our website, italianweekottawa.ca, for all the details. And again, I want to say thank you. We are able to have a little bit of time, absolutely, to have a little meet and greet and chat. And if you want, you can take photos, if it's okay with Véronique. You can take photos with her, because let's recall that she is a world-winning sommelier. So thank you again.
I just drink a lot.
Ciao, ciao.
Good. Thank you. I'm just going to go grab that